I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
As modernity has created promises that it has no ability to keep. What this means is that we're a society of disembedded individuals, stuck in the impossible situation of being alone together. And what was understood as emancipation has proved to be a form of isolation. It is important to understand that what I am telling you is not simply a cultural history. It's a description of the story that shapes every single person that you know. This is why there is a rise in mental illness. It's absolutely concurrent with the disembedding of the individual, because individuals can't constitute themselves by the very nature of the case. Subjectivity cannot sustain its own weight. We need others to tell us. But we've been given an ethical mandate by the Enlightenment that tells us that that's immoral, that nobody should constrain us.
I guess we're here for our last retrospective of 2023. And we'll eventually talk about the last couple of sessions we did with Rich Myrick on the politics of late 19th and early 20th century France and what that all meant for us today. But first, we had some kind of hopefully cool news for people who follow our podcast. We're going to start up something a little different this year, going into 2024. And even the name of it makes me smile. It's going to be called The Secret Grange. And I thought I would ask Spencer to explain this, because it was kind of your idea, but I really like the idea. But can you tell people how you came up with it and what it means?
Well, I guess it first came to my attention because you remember Soul. He had some crazy psychedelic dream where he woke up with the intuition he needed to look into the secret Grange.
Ooh.
And then he did some Googling, and my Googling indicates there was never, I don't know, if you Google the secret Grange, you're not going to find anything. But there was an order of, it was called the Grange. I know some of our patrons have brought it up before. It had a whole formal title, the National Grange of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry.
Okay.
It was basically like a para-Masonic group to attempt to organize farmers to basically combat monopoly railroad marketeering or price controls. One of the big things they wanted was price control over the railroads, because they felt like they were getting the screws put to them by finance capital, which is a green American story of yeoman farmers up against monopoly capital and finance capital.
And by paramasonic, you kind of just mean that they were kind of organized like Masons, but that they weren't Masons, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of the people that started it were Masons. And as I was researching this, you can find there's some big Masonic database where you can look at all of these different Masonic groups and what I'm calling paramasonic groups. I haven't heard anyone else say that, but I also have never really delved into the literature with any amount of vigor. So it's definitely Masonoid, I guess. But also, we're not trying to start some sort of secret society or whatever. This really, where this came up is we were talking about how, for various reasons, we wanted to move part of the podcast into within the walls of Patreon, in part because you felt like you were not saying things that you didn't want to be fully public, right?
Right. I sometimes feel like I'm editing myself, like, and I've thought, well, I could be a little bit more myself, or maybe a lot more myself, if I knew, I was in friendly circles. So yeah, like that appealed to me for sure.
Right. Which I can't really relate to, and maybe that's a flaw on my part that I haven't really been censoring myself, other than not saying the T word. But so we were talking about what do we do, and then just thinking about it, like I've been subscribed to like Chapo Trap House and TrueAnon for a long time, and I know that their patron only feeds are like, for Chapo, it's the Grey Wolf feed, which was this quasi-fascist Turkish paramilitary group. And then TrueAnon has the Truth feed. And so it
Mhm.
just came to me partly, from Soul's Cackling Laugh, the Secret Grange would be like a good fit. Soul's the
Oh
guy
yeah,
who did the piano soundtrack for our intro.
that's right. And it's really great. And we're going to have a hotline, are we not?
Yeah, the Granger Danger hotline will release to the $10 patrons. So the idea is that they'll be able to call in and either ask us questions or comment on either public DVD episodes or stuff within the Secret Grange is the
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, yeah. So we will divulge that phone number to our
And it's
patrons only. I'm excited. I'm excited. We got to move on to the other topic, I suppose, pretty soon. But I had this book that I've been reading just to kind of get a clear idea of the Grange. All right. So this book is called Knights of the Plow, Oliver H. Kelly and the Origins of the Grain in Republican Ideology. And it's by Thomas A. Woods. And this is just from the introduction, just one paragraph that kind of like describes where the Grange came from, because I think maybe people don't maybe know what it is. So it says during the 1850s and 1860s, Northern farmers experienced a virtual revolution in their economic and social orientation to the rest of American society. During that period, farmers in much of the northern United States changed from a diversified semi-subsistence agriculture with little more than a simple local marketing system to a complex specialized commercial agriculture. Some aggressive and advantageously located farmers had been involved in large-scale commercial agriculture for some time, and they eagerly embraced the opportunity to participate in an international economy. Others made the transition more reluctantly. Regardless of when they accepted a market orientation, however, in the 1860s, farmers found themselves dealing with manufacturers and salesmen, buyers, elevator operators, wheat graders, money lenders, and others, middlemen with whom few had had previous experience. Their former independence evaporated. No longer devoted to focusing on producing for the family and local community, no longer tied to the village craftsman or to the system of mutual bartering of goods and services, farmers suddenly found themselves immersed in an impersonal cash economy motivated by self-interest. As the commercial system developed, monopoly capitalism quickly began eliminating competition among the railroads and buyers who purchased and hauled the farmers' produce. When that began happening, farmers protested that American justice, liberty, and equality were being perverted by greedy capitalists. Organized in 1867, the Grange was dedicated to preserving the rights and dignity of farmers. So there you go. There's a little capsule of Grange history, and this book generally looks really good, by the way.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I'm excited to get started, and that will start next month. So we'll do one public episode of DBD, and we'll do one Secret Grange, and we will be looking for those voicemails to get us going. Oh, all right. It's been a good day so far, I must say. Like, just lots of fun news about university chancellors and stuff like that. But what we're on today for is to talk about the last couple of episodes where we interviewed Rich Myrick, who just got his PhD with the dissertation Action Libérale Populaire and the Legacy of Catholic Republicans in the French Third Republic. And he came in to talk to us about the ALP and the whole like political scene that was going on in France in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And I feel like we just keep coming back to that period of time, don't we? I mean, it was formative for Peter Maurin and Dorothy Day. It spawned the theory of distributism, which I've done a class about. The communal reading group right now for the Maurin Academy is reading the Personalist Manifesto by Emmanuel Mounier, whose writings inspired Peter Maurin, and all that type of thing was going on at this time. The GRANGE, started earlier, but it was definitely getting more and more like powerful, and at this time. And why is that? I think just because, at this point in time, people had lived with the capitalist economy, which, as that little blurb pointed out, was becoming more and more globalized, even then, to begin to really contemplate its impact on their lives, on their experience of what it meant to be human. So that just stood out to me again, that like time and time again, we're coming back to that period, and Rich's dissertation just serendipitously happened to be on that period. He hadn't heard of Peter Maurin because Maurin was an American figure.
Right. But once he heard about him, he could slot him into what he already knew. And a lot of things were legible based on the environment he came out of, was his read. I've been thinking more and more about how, like, not that this is a novel thought, I know people have said it, but like whenever you have big modern wars, it really does cement basically all of the constellations of power that were already like ready to take over. The wars like seal the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Insofar as like people say that, so the Grange came out of Reconstruction after the Civil War, and whether you're like on the far right or the far left, like in this country, and I think this analogously connects, like Murray Rothbard, the libertarian guy, I've heard it said that he said like the cause of liberty was all over after the Civil War because we had built such a centralized government, the greenbacks, all the monetary policy stuff going on, that any hope there was for a kind of decentralized anti-federalist republic was over because of the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And similarly, the hopes various like Catholic personalists had, whether you're Mounier or Maurin or Maritain, there was this hope, kind of before World War II, there was this hope that, okay, maybe we've learned liberal democracy / capitalism is inherently flawed. Obviously, fascism is bad for these reasons, communism for this reason. And that's why we need this, like, they didn't call it this, but like a fourth way, a third way, a fourth way, whatever kind of way you want to call it. There was a hope that we could sort of wake up and be more, I would put it in terms like be more liberal than the liberals. And but no, after World War II.
Right. That was something Belloc kind of, the distributist Belloc kind of just intuited about war, that war consolidates power. It destroys the superfluous labor and commodities too that could be used to, do something better. They need to be destroyed so that the capitalist system can continue to thrive. So he could see that, and yet distributists, along with the personalists, hope that given that level of destruction and just the havoc and pain that it caused, the people's humanity could come back online, and that they would wrest, power back from these whether it's like the major power structures of government and the economy, or just, technique, like Elul was writing during this time. And the appeal over and over again seemed to be, wake up, we're human beings. We have to fight back and not give in to these tendencies. So there's a hopefulness to this era and the literature that comes from it that I think we don't have now. We don't see as much of. I mean, can you?
I think there's still all sorts of, to my mind, delusional, hopeless people that think that their cause could still somehow win the day.
Maybe that's because they haven't heard of all this other stuff. I mean, I get the sense that a lot of people who are sort of, and I hear you, there are a lot of people who are, they find an idea or a proposal and it totally makes sense to them and they latch on to it. Like when I was in my early 20s, I thought term limits of Congress, would solve a lot of our problems in the United States. And I was rabidly like a term limiter, like single focus, for about a year. But part of the reason for that was that I didn't study American history. I'm a Europeanist, and I have quite a bit of education in ancient and modern liberal thought in Europe, but I hadn't really like contemplated American history all that much. And the more that you know about history, whatever history, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to, think that you've got a novel idea that's going to fix everything.
Mhm. Yes, it's far more likely you just have a new form of something old.
Mm-hmm. Right. Something that's been tried. And not to say that, you shouldn't try again if something's been tried and has failed, but you can't just try it naively again, right? With in dogged insistence that it just wasn't done right the last time, right? Or that, this notion that it's going to work 100%. Like there's this syndrome where people like basically think that folks in the past were stupid and that since we're smart, we can do it. It's obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, you could translate my cynicism about local organic ag, is partly because I think we're relearning the lessons of the ultimate failure of the Grange movement, even if they got some reforms passed and ultimately like did their vision of how America should be turn out. No, and you can connect it from the miscarriage we're living through to build local food systems, to the failure of the Grange movement, to the failure of Jeffersonian, Jacksonian democracy.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we could have on a mass scale a bunch of small holding agriculture.
Right.
And it's not, in theory, there's no reason why we couldn't have this if enough people really wanted it. But most people don't want it, and even more important, lots of very powerful interests don't want it.
Right. And that's a perennial problem, like it's a problem that will probably exist as long as we have humans, unless humans become so like integrated with AI that they're not humans anymore. Like one of the aspects of human nature that really is enduring is that we create these elites. There's a strong desire for power in some people. They become unscrupulous and they take advantage, especially of naive people who, think that they've got a plan to make things better. That seems to be the specialty. And, like in Maurin's case, as we sort of learned from Rich, he was attracted to come out of the Christian Brothers who were run out of France, and he was attracted to Sion, which was this fairly new movement that was unbelievably created by a bunch of teenage boys. Did you catch that? There's a bunch of teenage boys in some school who are like, oh, let's start a magazine and let's like create study circles and let's get this going across the country. And they actually managed to do that. And it became this pretty popular movement. By the time Warren was introduced to it, it was at that level of study circles with the idea that I guess the idea was that they would build local Catholic community, Catholics being the only kind of Christians really in France for, for the most part. And they would build local Catholic community and foster the clarification of thoughts to get people to cooperate more through these study circles. And Morin was very attracted to that, and he remained attracted to that. So that was an idea that he brought with him to the United States. And a word that I've heard, applied to this general way of thinking that he brought here is communitarianism. I don't think that's a perfect term for it, but I think that might give people an idea, right? And personalism factors into that because it was just basically the idea that people need to see each other as real, individual, human persons with unique dignity because their interior experience made them unique, unique creatures that needed to be recognized as such, not simply as tools of an industrial machine or citizens in a mass, liberal democracy, but as individuals in that sense, persons. So he brought those ideas to America, and he found more fertile ground here. Do you remember why, like, Myrick said he found more fertile ground here than in France in a way for these ideas? But I mean, actually, I thought the ground in France seemed to be fairly fertile, right? Because I mean, they really had started something. When it came here, maybe because it took on more of an economic spin in this country than it did in France, but it seemed to me more limited here, or like it had to backtrack further. The Catholic worker movement had to backtrack further in its purpose than, say, Sion did. But maybe I'm moving ahead too fast.
And maybe, I mean, I would have to look more into it. I'm not ready to concede or argue against his position that America is more open to a kind of personalist ethos.
Yeah.
I think I feel more confident in saying if Chris Coutrin were here, he would say, yes, of course, because America is at the forefront of the bourgeois revolution,
Hmm.
and that France has always had this ball and chain attached to it, which is its like Baroque French heritage. And that is always held back. I'm connecting some dots, and I'm not fully sure he would say that, but I'm confident he would say something like that.
So
And
the Baroque, could you explain the Baroque French heritage a bit?
I'm less confident talking about that. But I think what he would see a disjunct, and we would agree that that late antique and medieval Christianity, there is a fundamental disjunct between that kind of culture and worldview and a bourgeois one where instead of we believe in some notion of we're a group of people and we are receiving revelation and authority mostly from above, and then we sort of receive it and confirm it. That is something fundamentally different than like we, the people, are going to organize ourselves and authority comes from us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And therefore, we are in a way more personalists.
So
I know
yeah.
this is a convolute, like the new polity people would argue against this. And if you want to delve into like Hobbes and Locke, we're painting with a broad brush here.
Right. Well, and you're basically talking about individualism, which could be like amenable to personalism. And maybe during that period of time when Morin and Day were operating, when they founded the movement, because of the Great Depression and all the suffering that was caused by it, maybe at that point, American individualism could be sort of reconceptualized in a Christian way as personalism, looking at the dignity of each person, regardless of where they are in the economic system and so forth. On the other hand, for most of American history, individualism leads to, what Tocqueville observed as more or less like conformity, right? That there is no real fostering of the quality of the interior individual in America because we place so much emphasis on how we fit into the, whether it's the, industrial corporate juggernaut or whatever, or the military or, these structures and how productive we are, which is an external quality, right? So in practice, our individualism is very thimble deep, and so outside of that period of time, maybe one of the reasons why that experiment failed and many others is because you always have these mitigating factors of, yeah, that sounds good, but we have other priorities, basically. Like we now have economic growth. We've got other priorities. We don't need to look at you as a unique, precious, individual, but as like what you can basically provide this project, this ongoing thing that we're doing.
I think that's true as far as it goes, but I also think we've never fully gotten away. It seems to me the like split schizoid nature of bourgeois society, and probably especially if Coutron's right, America as at the forefront of bourgeois society, is obviously there's this like rationalist, utilitarian, economistic aspect of it.
Right.
But there's also always been this kind of romantic personalist aspect of it. And it's always nice when the personalistic aspect of it can be a kind of sock puppet for the utilitarian. So like when the pitch, let's say you were a devout Catholic person in America before World War II. And then at the end of it, you were given the New Deal, which is like, look, we'll let go of like suspecting you. For the most part, America's going to let go of suspecting you of whatever that Pogue's album is, like Romanism and Rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
We'll let go of that. You can join the middle class. You can live in the suburbs. Do you want 2 point whatever kids and a picket fence and a chicken in every pot? The pitch isn't like totally surrender and you're going to be free to worship wherever you want to on Sunday. And by the way, is this really so against your values and morals?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're getting a sort of a moderate bourgeois revolution, not the like renounce your faith, liberty, equality, fraternity.
Right.
You're more toned down version of it. The appeal to that isn't, and in the short run, it isn't necessarily, okay, sell your birthright for this mess of pottage. It is actually, no, you and your children are going to be able to more or less freely develop yourself. And by the way, this isn't a social construction we're imposing on you. This is natural. This is how the way the world works. And by the way, do you have a problem with this? Is this because you're a communist?
Right. But then that requires so much gut muscle on the part of people to be put into that situation where they've made that nice soft compromise, and now they're charged with, okay, but maintain your beliefs and principles and your sense of higher purpose and maintain and foster who you are as that unique human being with dignity and purpose. In that context, you have to keep it going. And the structure takes away liberalism takes away the supports that were in place to kind of help you do that, and now it's all up to you. And you can do it if you, and then if you don't, if you sort of slowly erode, and pretty soon you don't know who you are anymore or what your purpose is, then you have only yourself to blame in this tricky way of thinking, right? Because it was your choice. Everything is your choice. So I hear you. I guess the best I can say is Coutron is right. If part of his point is that within the bourgeois liberal way of thinking, there's this kernel that exists, right? That is not necessarily expressed, but this kernel that exists of whatever we want to call it, in human value, human worth, right? The sort of humaneness.
Yeah, although I suspect he'd say something like the ultimate human value, which is freedom, meaning self-determination.
Yeah, which I mean, we don't agree with that, right? Like, although that sounds bad, but I don't think either one of us think that freedom and self-determination are the highest good. And I think that's one thing that separates the two of us. Isn't that interesting? But like early, I don't know, am I speaking out of turn, or would you agree with what I just said?
No, I wouldn't disagree. I would just note, then we're on a slippery slope on the question of if freedom is living in the truth, we're on a slippery slope of what is truth. And what are the full implications of living in the truth?
Right. Well, freedom is not truth, I guess, is my short answer to that. I think this is where, liberalism really is, when you basically take that liberal position, you are already on that slippery slope, because you've substituted truth for freedom. I hope this sounds awfully abstract to people, but basically, liberal freedom is empty, is what I'm trying to say. Like, it allows you to make whatever choice you want. I mean, that's the liberal ideal, and the notion is that if we all are free to make those choices, that ultimately, at a societal level, we'll have economic growth, we'll have fairly decent laws, and everything will sort of work out because we're rational self-maximizers. However, obviously, that isn't always true. And also, we act as though some choices are actually illegitimate for some reason that makes no sense given the liberal way of thinking. So we still have these prejudices, moral prejudices and hangovers left over from a different way of thinking. But in the liberal system, there's no like truth, there's just choices.
They're just choices and brute facts.
Yeah.
Yeah, or I'd put it another way, the core of it is that we're all essentially trans.
Mhm.
Like we're all on the move, we're all making ourselves.
Right.
We're all deciding who we are. And then what that can't ask is like, well, what is the nature of all the reality that confronts us? That's
Right.
from that perspective, the question of what is the nature of things is an inherently, at best, it's delusional, and at worst, it's authoritarian and totalitarian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the dangers of being in that constant state of transformation and just sort of like, I don't know, self-making and with no particular, end in sight, is that people become very vulnerable to external suggestion and manipulation and commercial and peer pressure and things like that, because there's no like other real way to decide in a world with seemingly endless choices, at least at some levels, not economic choices, but at other levels, like as far as what we want to value in particular, and sort of how we conceive of ourselves, and how are you going to make those decisions? And of course, in a lot of cases, you make them on the basis of some external pressure or stimuli. And I think this is why people are,
Or just how you feel. whatever desire within you is the strongest,
Yeah.
decide to.
In the moment. Yeah. Right. But then it never feels satisfactory because you know it's not true necessarily. It's not certain. So,
Right. Well, and I would say this is the central conflict of at least being a modern bourgeois subject is having some sense that I am a person in like the sense of personalism, like a spiritual being that's like made in the image of God. They wouldn't go that far, or at least some of them wouldn't, but a spiritual being that has an inner drive towards wholeness and connection to other people and to God.
mhm.
We're that, but we're also, call us an individual or a dividual or what have you, all of these impulses and instincts and desires. And we're being constantly pulled between these two, as you know, I guess the new agey way to say it would be like our higher and our lower self, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And,
And this is, well, go
and
ahead.
you're walking around with this, and then it's like, how are we going to navigate post neoliberal techno feudalism?
Hmm. So just to remind people, I mean, we're on this kind of rant here because we're trying to like discuss why it is that um, these kinds of ideas, distributism, personalism, communitarianism, the ideas that drove Peter Maurin when he came to the United States, uh, Sion movement and all of this, why these things get derailed and why this vision of like human concerted cooperation to do something good, why that tends to fail. Um, and so we're talking about like the way people think and are under liberalism, because liberalism is, I mean, it's the trajectory we've been on for a while, and it kind of like appeals to what Spencer is calling our lower as opposed to our higher, impulses, right? Like the more impulses, the better. Well, human beings have always had these impulses, and Socrates like basically taught that these impulses enslave people, right? That this is when we give into our lower impulses, which can include the desire for power. Um, uh, we enslave ourselves. And the only way to escape the slavery, according to him, was to live a life of reason. But,
But this is also the difference between an ancient and a modern view.
yeah, exactly. Which was what my whole last year's like political philosophy monthly series was about, was like contrasting the ancient and modern view for that very reason. So, we have a system that stimulates these lower desires and keeps us on that endless quest for satisfaction, right? And can knock us off pretty quickly, knock us off any sort of decision we might make to do something we know we ought to do, that would sort of collectively lift people up and, give them a better life. We know that we would need to do this collectively, right? In order to for any sort of higher, better community, any sort of better cooperation to happen. But these impulses knock us off pretty fast.
Well, the only thing I object to with what you're saying there is I think it also appeals to our higher impulses as well. It's
Okay.
trying to say what makes you unique. You're willing to work really hard. Well, can you find a way on the market or in the nonprofit NGO sector to realize yourself and make a difference? Why waste your time trying to do anything revolutionary at either a local or a global level? Why waste your time doing that? That's too big. Let's keep things at a human scale and let's work with what we've got.
Yeah.
And to me, that's also where this connects to Meyrick's dissertation, and a certain amount of what he talked about was you had when he's talking about like the ALP as a phenomenon on the right, there were all of he called them the intransigents, and we'd call them like traditionalists, but people that they wanted a return of the monarchy in some form. And they're like, no, there's like a natural order of things. The social hierarchy is real and true, and we can only be free by accepting our role within this social hierarchy, which is naturally and supernaturally ordained. And then you have another group of people, the moderates, who are like, well, actually, and then ultimately backed up by Leo the 13th, and to a greater or lesser extent, subsequent popes. Um, well, actually, if the traditional teaching from Aristotle is there's three forms of good, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a long time since I thought about this. If there's three forms of good government, which are monarchy, aristocracy, and a republic, and if there's three forms of bad government called a tyranny, an oligarchy, and a democracy, well, then maybe a liberal republic or a liberal democracy can be retrofitted into a Catholic liberal republic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the Faustian bargain that I would argue that the church has made. Not to say that decadent absolutist monarchical regimes aren't also a deal with the devil in another way, but
Right.
that's the core. When this is also a digression, but when the traditionalists in Catholicism now are like, Vatican II is when the church made a concordat with modernity, is like, well, actually, the Ralliement happened 70 years before that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Looking back at this history, you can see this issue, this problem has been around for a long time. And it really is it presents you pretty squarely with the question, can what Myrick called confessional Catholicism, by which he meant just like fairly serious practicing Catholics, or we could broaden it out, Christianity, serious Christianity, is it really compatible with liberalism? And if it is not, and I think, and probably both of us would argue that at the social level, it's not. Maybe at the individual level, it can be, depending on whether you can have the gut muscle to do it. But if it's not possible at the social level, then what are Catholics to make of that? And to make of the church's kind of embrace of that back there during the Ralliement. Because I think that the Ralliement happened because the Pope Leo, urged that sort of like reconciliation with republicanism, because it was the wave of the future, and the church has to, if it's going to survive into the next generations, has to make these adjustments. I mean, I don't know. What is your understanding of that? Like, how do you see it?
The Ralliement.
Yeah, I mean, and just like the rightness or wrongness of it.
I mean, it slots in. I haven't read as much of this as I would like to have, but yeah, I've also before Myrick, I'd heard it called like the Leonine gamble,
Mm.
which is okay, we're going to more or less give up trying to prop up the ancient regime, the coalition of throne and altar, and we're going to basically join the right liberal flank of modern republics.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I spent too much time on the left to like emotionally care too much about it one way or another. Because to me, it's all a kind of foreign mental space, to be choosing between right liberalism, which I really don't like, and a kind of late or an early modern late absolutist state, which I also probably wouldn't really like living under, but is so foreign from my experience that I don't have a gut visceral reaction against it. And I've converted to Catholicism, so mentally I've already kind of capitulated to a lot of that thinking, probably.
Hmm.
But having spent so much time on the left, like I don't like the idea of being part of a united front of Christians of all sort of stripes, and we just have to deeply care about abortion and gay slash now trans rights because the gay battle has been so lost. And to me, it's like, how's the battle going? You know, how has Christianizing a liberal republic gone by
Yeah,
any standards?
I don't like being associated with that stuff either because I have this sort of like I have complicated opinions about all of that, but I don't like the way that it's approached by right liberal Christians. And um I think that, you know, we've gone down this path, and this was kind of maybe foreordained back in those days of the Ralliement, of just sort of thinking that, you know, if you're a serious Christian, well, then you have to be sort of in that political space. And, you know, we have to accept that, you know, we have to get our moral agenda, whatever it may be, sort of addressed by the political system and so forth. There was another option, and there still always is, again, gut muscle, but like, it would be for people to just start living their lives and organizing themselves and their churches and religious organizations as they see fit. I mean, that is the one thing, you know, within this larger liberal framework, supposedly we do have the freedom to do quite a bit, you know, the way we want to. And yet, for the most part, churches don't do that. Or if they do it in a really weird, culty, screwball way, you know, with I'm thinking of like right-wing Christian nationalist stuff, not the kind of stuff that, you know, I would prefer, which is like actually forming community and helping each other out, and, you know, sort of in a way developing polity amongst Christians within the liberal framework. Um, it'd be hard to do, but that is a choice, and it's a choice that Christians consistently haven't taken. And it always, and this is a big question for me, is why not? You know, why is that so hard?
I increasingly think at the core of it is because, I mean, to use these fraught terms, because it's very hard to be a person working with other persons when that means going against the grain of your society.
Sure.
You know, like when Clark Massey interviewed us for the Simpleton podcast, like this past summer, the one moment that stuck with me is when I asked him, why are we the only Catholic worker, or the only Catholic worker in the KC metro area? Like, there's over 1 million people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what percentage are Catholics, but why? And not to be like smug about it, it's kind of the opposite. Like, um, but I was like, why are we the only Catholic worker? And his response was first to concede that, I think he said, we suck, which is a good starting
Wait a
answer.
minute. Who sucks?
Catholics in the KC area. This is, I think,
Oh,
uh,
all right.
yeah, yeah. Oh, maybe I suck too, but but then he backed it up and basically said, well, it's all very complicated, you know. Let's be grown-ups here. I mean, I'm expanding. What I think what he said is, well, it's all very complicated. It can be obvious to you that we need Catholic workers, but also there are all these other things that people get sucked into, that seems more desirable or worthwhile.
Right, yeah. Within the church, even like, I know one big thing for a lot of older gentlemen in the Catholic Church is the Knights of Columbus.
Yeah.
And most churches have some sort of women's group that doesn't even remotely equal the grand regalia of the Knights of Columbus, which I deeply resent. And you know, these are more like traditional service organization type things. And many people are attracted to them because they do kind of fit within the framework of, okay, I've got my day job and I've got my family and I've got these other things going on, and then I'll plug into the Knights of Columbus or whatever the equivalent is.
I can have a sword and hand out canned soup.
Right, right. And I can do that on the weekend once a month or whatever. And that's really going above and beyond. And frankly, it is in our society because most people don't do stuff like that, right? So like that's the normal mode for kind of a serious Christian would be to like not just go to church, but maybe join up with like the community meal group or the Knights of Columbus or something like that. Now in Kansas City, we've got, isn't there just 2 Catholic workers total, one of which is you guys?
There might be like a Mennonite one on the Kansas side. I'm not clear.
Okay, so there might be 3. And then what is Simple House classified as? Or maybe it's not. It's
But
a Simple House.
there's a few, them and Jerusalem Farm. I would argue they're basically, you know.
Yeah, okay. Jerusalem Farm is Catholic without calling themselves, but they're a Catholic group that, yeah. So like, let's say maximum 4 still, that's not very many in a city that's that large. And Jerusalem Farm and JP2 Farm are the 2 that are kind of explicitly Catholic. Well, and Simple House is Simple House. So there's 3. I'm not saying that this is like a hopeful situation.
Sure. Yeah, and there's an Eastern Orthodox outfit kind of around here too that's doing something kind of similar. So like, but again, even with this, we're talking about a percentage within, we're talking about way less than 1%.
Right, right. A tiny fragment. Yeah. And that would be what you're saying is that would be because that type of thing is just enough outside of the norm. It doesn't fit well with the rest of the liberal context of what's happening in most people's lives. It would be too much time. I mean, let's get specific. Too much time, maybe too much like what collective decision making, dealing with other people.
It isn't their favorite thing.
Yeah, it's work. In most cases, it would be work. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So once again, we're kind of back at this, like, people have good ideas and sort of at the ideational level, people can imagine, yeah, like it'd be great if everybody was, I mean, doesn't it kind of boil down to like, it would be great if everybody could follow what, maybe the 10 Commandments or the teachings of Jesus, if we could all like do such a sort of simplistic thing to say, but it gets at the point again of, like, it's not that these ideas or teachings are bad, but that, when we latch onto them kind of naively, we don't fathom like how hard and how difficult they are in practice.
Yeah,
And
any of these ideas. And more than ever in my life, I can concede the how amazing it is that liberalism and capitalism work to the extent they do.
sure, yeah, and they do because they don't assign responsibility to anybody in particular, right? You're just kind of like doing what's right for you at the moment. And you're right that, I mean, they work remarkably well, or at least they have, with some very serious downsides.
And that's not to say, I'm not even saying it's like unique, like all sorts of social orders have more or less worked well
Yeah,
throughout.
right. A lot of them work well though because people are forced to like conform, and this one, well, we're forced to conform by like the threat of starvation. I know that sounds kind of stark, but that would be really true. Like, if we don't conform, well, we won't have a job and then we won't have a roof over our heads and so on. But it certainly is not the sort of direct, brutal, like suppression that a lot of regimes take to gain order and like efficiency and all of these things that we have, relatively speaking.
Sure. Right. And so given that situation, what is so bad about being a Tory slash a Republican? You know, if we just buckle down and accept reality.
Yeah. And the only answer I've got is, well, two answers. One, once again, climate change, it's going to eat us alive. We got to deal with it. I think that we should just be clear whenever we talk about this. The Maurin Academy thinks it's an ongoing thing and it's too late to stop it. We need to adjust. Of course, we still should do what we can to try to influence government to like handle it, but it is far down the tracks, and we're going to be dealing with these issues into the foreseeable future, and they're probably going to get worse. So
Either
that
and either survival, let alone regeneration, just surviving is going to require radical adjustments by humanity.
exactly, that's going to confront us. And at that point, some of these ideas that now seem kind of impossible or where human nature is too fragile to like seriously try are going to look and they're going to look like good alternatives compared to what other people are going to come up with. Like one of the articles I read earlier this year was Ross Midiga's article in the APSR on authoritarianism and climate change. And he made the argument that it's possible. I'd love to have him on this show, by the way. But he's arguing that it's possible that we will have to have authoritarian government just to be able to deal with the effects of climate change, and that democracy may not be possible or desirable under certain circumstances where you have to act quickly and decisively, and you can't ask millions of people whether they're going to like it or not. And so reading that, I was confronted by the urgency of, are there going to be ideas and people with experience around who have alternatives or ways to like deal with confronting challenges that don't amount to just basically giving into a strong man who will tell you what to do. Whenever people's backs are up against the wall, they go looking around for, saving ideas and ways and practices. And so I think that this is one reason why maybe it's not good enough to just kind of like sink into the comfortable, slowly sinking couch that we that we are in. So that's one reason. And I currently can't remember the other reason, but I probably will remember it pretty soon. But I don't know. Am I tracking?
I
Are you
mean,
with me?
I don't, I agree with what you said on your first point.
Yeah, I think we need to keep saying that because it's in the background of everything we do. If we had endless time and we could see that like 500 years from now, we could still be grappling with these things, and maybe we just continue to slide into the morass of soulless materialism that, we're stuck in. At some point, maybe we just technologize ourselves right out of it and become Star Trek and everything's hunky dory, right? That's kind of the Jeff Bezos vision of the world, right? Like if we really believe that, I don't think either one of us would even be doing this. So that's always there, and it's the reason why the liberal compromise, if it ever was good enough, doesn't seem good enough now.
Sure. And I would add as well, it's not just we need to accept the natural laws, about carbon cycles and about soil nutrition. It's not just that we need to pay heed to these foundational realities, although it is that, but it's not like we're living in a golden age of self-realization.
Mm-hmm.
Be my position. Now, some people would say, actually, no, it is, but I feel like I see a lot of decadence and depression. And so then there's not just our recording catastrophe, but we're also not even having that much fun at the party.
Yeah, that's pretty much in the zone of what my second point was going to be before I forgot it, is that, we've kind of gotten past this point in the book that I'm writing right now, The Gap in God's Country. One of the chapters deals with the Cleaver vision, right? The 1950s white picket fence Cleaver vision. And there was a brief period of time when, people could really kind of like think, yeah, we can all do that. We can move off the farm, we can move into town, we can get desk jobs. Our wife, or now husband, I guess, could stay at home, raise the kids, and we can all just live in a suburban paradise, and it's just going to get better for our kids. And now we've entered a period of time where, like most young people don't think that their lives are going to be better than their parents, and they don't think they're going to have like the white picket fence vision. And there's an awful lot of people who cannot find fulfillment or even hope to ever find fulfillment on whatever work they can scrounge up, because they're lucky if they can keep their job at Walmart or Target or whatever before they automate the job out of existence. And there's a lot of people who don't even have jobs for one reason or another and are living on the streets. So, like, of course, we've had that problem for a long time, but I feel like it's getting worse. So anyway, like, yeah, we're not having that much fun at the party. A lot of people aren't. Some people are having a lot of fun. I guess Clarence Thomas had a lot of fun. The provost of, or no, the chancellor of the University of Wisconsin at, I think, LaSalle was sure having a lot of fun with his probably over $200,000 salary, doing those Pornhub shows with his wife. But an awful lot of us don't have that level of privilege, and it feels like there's more and more separation between the two. So it's hard to imagine that things are going to get better for a lot of folks, and that too kind of pushes you in the direction of, okay, what other ideas are on offer here? And I think this is one of the reasons for the popularity of Donald Trump and the whole like right-wing surge, is because people are looking around for alternatives. And that's one of the ones that's very vocal and on order there.
Well, and it's attractive because it basically preserves you in your decadence.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you that actually it's just a whole nother group of people who is the problem.
Sure. It's the elites, what is it? The deep state. Sorry, forgot my lingo there for a second.
Well, there's definitely a deep state,
Yeah.
but yeah, well, and whatever it, like, and if you more people, I mean, this is why ultimately what we're arguing for is, if history repeats itself, what we're arguing for is as irrelevant as what the personalists argued for, because what we're selling is a lot less attractive than, if I embody like a Trumpian person or whatever the sequel to Trump is, my pet theory is that Kanye is going to be president in a decade or two. Here's the pitch. It's actually everything that we just talked about. It's because we're either in the pocket of or deluded by a global technocratic elite that had climate change is just a lie, so that we'll swallow depopulation and the loss of our liberties, and we'll all just live in a pod and eat cricket powder. And actually, all we need to do is like bring back jobs and keep the vending machines stocked. And the reason we can't do that is, yeah, because there's a bunch of these elites.
Liberal elites. Yeah. Right.
Whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be liberal elites, but the figure of the Jew.
Sure. Writ
And
large. Yeah.
if we could just throw them off, we could have a party again. Or not just we could have a party, also we could return to natural virtues. We could have stable communities.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot more appealing of an offer than Actually, are you ready to heroically struggle to become a person? And then this is the real kicker. That's already a tough pill to swallow. But then actually to really be successful at any kind of scale, you would have to find a bunch of other people and you would have to take wild risks.
Yeah, you'd have to take risks and you'd have to work hard. And without a whole lot of reward at first, which people generally only do if they absolutely have to and don't have any other choices. And as I'm mentioning the other day in a different context, we were talking about the figurative. Again, we want people to know we're speaking figuratively, but the sort of figurative woman's work in our society, right, is the stuff that nobody wants to do. They want to do the men's work. Women want to do men's work. The figurative man's work is the idea stuff, the leadership, right? The toss it around, and think about it and discuss. And the woman's work is changing the diapers and wiping the figurative ass and doing the hard daily grind that doesn't get a whole lot of accolades or attention, but it's that woman's work which gets everything actually done and the reason why anything works. And of course, I'm speaking in figurative terms. Don't call me a sexist. But liberals and conservatives alike, women and men alike, admire men's work, and they want to shrink away from the woman's work because it's not glamorous. And when people do it, we pay them the least, right? You see it in our society when with childcare workers or the cooks, the cleaners, the people who actually fix things, get things fixed in your house, scoop the crap outside, you know,
I
dig
would
ditch.
say it's the farm hands that are actually in the fields harvesting things that we haven't figured out how to automate yet.
Right. Yeah. They're the people who are literally bringing us life itself in one form or another, and we pay them little and look down upon them. If you took them all away, we'd all starve immediately.
They don't make culture. I
Right.
reckon it.
Right. And we don't want to like slam culture. I don't want to make that mistake, but you can't have culture without the basis, and the basis is part of what creates a fine culture, right? Like the cultivation creates the culture, so to speak. And without proper cultivation and respect for it, you poison yourselves. And I feel like that's where we're at right now. Um, but in order for people to get out from under this, that would be necessary. And it will be necessary. I mean, there are times, nothing lasts forever. We're going to hit a point where people are going to have to fend for themselves and cooperate more. Uh, and and when we do, I suspect the people who know how to do hard work and suck it up and deal with the unglamorous stuff are going to be more inclusively fit.
That and the key takeaway I got from rereading Unsettling of America again for our class was how at the core of everything he's talking about is how modernity as like an age of divorce, as he calls it, um, has like sundered all of the bonds, the religiaire that hold things together, and that ultimately everything he's arguing for in that book and that we're arguing for at the Maurin is for a reconnection of culture, of cultivation. And but if your ideal picture is I'm an atomized individual and uh, my trans freedom is actually you need everything ripped apart so that you can, at least the promise is that if everything's ripped apart, then we'll be free to be who we are.
Right. It takes for granted a sort of basis that is is always going to be there, I think. I think that's partly why people can live in that ether, is because they still take for granted that all the other stuff's going to keep coming.
Right. And that's part of why you don't want to reconnect things is you're going to get constricted. It's all going to add up to a big cross. Um, and I mean, I've lived this out with the Mort stuff is that I started out like, hey, I want to farm with my friends and, let's try and build like a life and, like food processing business together. And now it's like, well, what if you own 2 to 3 houses in the ghetto and 2 of them have foundation issues?
One of which your buddy is, namely myself, trying to fix up or help you fix up.
Right.
And I mean, part of the answer is the foundation's not going to slide down the hill. But yeah, like
But it's
it,
just the reality I never thought. I didn't even know that that was a layer of reality you would have to deal with, which is obviously idiotic, but like you
yeah,
just you just get slammed with all of these unforeseen situations.
right. And then you have to deal with them. I think one of the things that we both dealt with, and probably everybody involved with Morton and JP2, now JP2 has to deal with, is just um, grappling continually with with the reality that you can't have your ultimate vision, but you can't, because of that, let everything go without becoming even a bigger part of the problem, right? Because I mean, what we want, or what we're being told, I guess, in one way or another, is you got to give up on your dreams. I mean, it's kind of like what you were saying earlier, right? Like you have to give up on your dreams in order to make this compromise and have your little zone of security, hopefully, and that compromise isn't too bad because you can still sort of be you. You just have to be a little less you or something like that. Um, and we're sort of in this zone of saying, we're going to make some compromises, but not that many. In other words, we're not going to compromise all the way. And I think it's hard, but it's doable. At least it's been doable so far, but it is hard. And I don't know, I don't think any of us know whether that can last in the long run or not. But I do feel as though if you give up entirely on your, whatever you want to call it, your values maybe is a better word than dreams, but like what you know to be true, what your values are, then you've lost a significant part of who you are, right? And I mean, this gets back to the philosophy of personalism of Maurin's personalism. Who you are in your interior being, is supposedly the most precious part of life, right? So you don't want it to be sequestered and completely incapable of expression in the real world. It's the strangely enough, it's the one kind of expression that is not allowed, right? Very easily, right? The vision of wanting to live your life differently is an external expression which is not allowed. You can slap another tattoo on your face if you want to, right? Or
Well,
whatever.
I think it's not allowed when it starts to challenge fundamental ways that society is ordered. And so 50 years ago, slapping a tattoo on your face would have been uh, a lot more controversial. Now I don't know, at least I don't fully believe this, but I somewhat do, the conservative camp that our culture, that the increasing acceptance of tattoos is a sign of moral degeneration. I think
Oh
there's
boy.
some I say it as somebody with an above average amount of tattoos. But there is something, I don't think it's a mistake that they are getting more and more socially accepted
Sure.
as, as a symptom of a general decline. And part of what that is um, we don't really care what people do with their bodies. And first it started with we don't care if people are fat.
Did it start there?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure there were historical precedents before then.
Well, yeah. So I'm trying to think back when. Twiggy and all that, those really super skinny models. And I think that came from like, well, that's not a very good choice because that's not healthy. We need to stop glorifying like stick figure models. And then slowly that sort of evolved. I mean, the whole like, big women in like modeling and things like that is it's another iteration of kind of like the wanting to accept people exactly the way they are and kind of like celebrate every choice that people make as equally valid, which is vacuous and in the case of like this example can be harmful, just like validating like super skinniness can be harmful, right? Because basically you're saying it's okay to be like extremely unhealthy at we're not talking about slightly overweight, but we're talking about obesity, right? And that's okay. um, we do validate a lot of things that are harmful. But I guess like to get back to the point of what makes it decadent or what makes tattoos on your face potentially decadent as a sort of example is only that it would be just another sort of somewhat shallow, vacuous attempt to like somehow be your true self, as though your true self is expressed best by putting something on your face. I mean, or like feeling proud of your fat and dressing it up, or whatever you've got, I think that's
And I think it's a step beyond that, not just that you're sort of instantiating like a vacuous feeling into your flesh, but that you're also like mutilating it, which I don't want to go so far as to say like all tattoos are mutilation. But to
yeah,
me, where I brought this up, I think where the relevance is at a certain point, what's the difference between taking care of yourself, like genuine self-care, quote unquote, and self-harm slash self-mutilation.
mm-hmm. I
And and as a society, we've reached a point. Is it surprising that that face tattoos are more and more accepted, or at least like now, like culturally, socially, like rappers, it's a common thing.
right,
Or
like think Post
but
Malone or something like that. Yeah,
right, there's yeah, but also in all sorts of ways, we tolerate other self-harm or harming other people or harming the planet.
right.
Because actually, that's how we're going to live our truth, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's why, not to like to sort of focus on the face tattoo is to kind of like go into that zone of deviation where we forget about the larger mutilations, and then sort of may serve the function just as when people like obsess about like even gay and trans stuff, when we obsess about that kind of stuff exclusively or at a superficial level, start like just sort of casting aspersions, it's a diversionary thing, right? It keeps us from being able to see other even bigger problems.
Well, it's exciting. Or
Yeah,
like if
it is exciting. Yeah,
it's like
right.
an
It's exciting.
interesting, it's more interesting than listening to us pontificate for 2 hours about the Faustian bargain that is Ralliement Toryism.
Right. Or like the sort of weird surreal moment when you walk into the grocery store and you realize that your food is entirely trans and wrapped in plastic from head to toe. Yum yum. You'll never go into the grocery store feeling the same way again. So like that's
Right.
yeah.
And so the question Myrick raised, I think, is something like, was the Ralliement French Catholics getting a face tap of liberalism space tap? Is I guess it's worth considering, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And and in theory, there are all these arguments about how liberalism can be reconciled with our Catholicism or with whatever radical or even moderate politics we have. In theory, that's an argument. In practice, it's like, do you have the horses for that? So,
Right.
who are
Yeah.
you? Who are your homies? And do you all have the horses for it? And We mostly don't, but we can hang out in the secret Grange and talk.
Well, we can do that, which I've always advocated for a certain amount of fun in any situation, because without having some fun, and I'm not saying that the podcast is going to be fun, probably not. Once you ask the question, but like making the call could be fun.
Pervert, but
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, we'll be exclusive, but we'll be selective in our taking of these calls. But like, yeah, we have to have a certain amount of fun in order to be able to deal with what is otherwise not too much fun, but is necessary. And the one thing I can say for Maurin and Day, those two they worked hard, right? And did a lot of unglamorous work. They did a lot of, or at least Day did quite a bit of sort of protesting stuff too, which is maybe a little bit more glamorous, but like, or newsworthy or attention catching or whatever it may be. But like, for the most part, she did a lot of work in cooking and cleaning and just dealing with a lot of poor people in a very bad time. And because they were willing to do those things and forego, like especially Day forewent. I mean, Maurin came from this really poor, like rustic environment, but Day came from a fairly bourgeois, kind of lifestyle into this. And gave it up for the rest of her life to work hard. And because of that, we still know who they are, and there are people still out there trying to do something inspired by them in these Catholic worker houses and farms. And I guess what's that good for? Maybe as proof that it can be done. And you have to ask yourself why it is that some people do this, right? They wouldn't do it if they didn't find it extremely meaningful once they're in it. And so, taking those steps in some way to kind of enter a zone of discomfort is probably what it takes to have a meaningful experience in our world. Unlike the face tattoo, which might give you a thrill for a moment, especially if your parents don't like tattoos or something like that, right? Woo! But like then you become bored and anxious and upset again. Maybe what it takes to get out of that is to take some risks, even a little bit, and do some work with other people, as hard as it is.
yeah, right. And part of what we're trying to push here is a kind of pedagogy that can allow people to become conscious of themselves as persons and their responsibilities to other persons. And
Right. Well put.
need to wed culture and cultivation.
Right. It's well put. And it's hopefully, as people become more involved, more and more people will understand those connections, because it takes a while. It's not something that's easily communicated in a soundbite. It's the reason why we offer what seems like a lot of disparate topics. They do come together, and we're doing a better and better job of showing people how they come together. So we would always urge people to, if you've been thinking about it, join us, right? It's like the most, I mean, among other things, it's the least expensive, like, educational option you can possibly imagine. We've got some highly educated, thoughtful people, self-educated, as well as like university educated folks who are doing some really amazing sessions, classes. We've got one coming up right around the corner on the 11th by Miriam Dominguez, who's going to deal with the idea of the alternative economy, the gift economy. So that's going to be exciting. I'm going to be attending that. So yeah, like if you've been on the fence, take the time to check out the Maurin Academy Patreon, and we'll put that in our show notes. So one more push for reminder, we're going to the Secret Grange next month, 1 episode public, 1 episode for patrons only.
And it's been a good year. Thanks for sticking with us. If you're still listening, you are the resistance.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We really appreciate you. In podcast land, we don't always know how many people are listening to podcasts. We got to figure that out. We got the YouTube channels, but um, if you're if you become a fan of the show, we really appreciate it, and we'd love to have you show up on one of the events that we do. So yeah, we're looking forward to 2024.
Vegas Lazy.
All right, are we done?